how much of Japanese culture do they have in their families? Do they speak Japanese? Do they know what Japanese food is, etc., etc. But I was detained by Cuban immigration for about 2 hours while they asked me what was I doing in the country, and what did my parents do, what kind of questions were they asking, and it was very cordial. And then we got talking about politics and George W. Bush and Karl Rove. The immigrations officer, he was actually pretty he was very well educated, so it would have been a very, very interesting conversation had I not been sick and wanting to just die from sickness. So anyway, back to the slide. So the community is very small. But it is also not, it's not cohesive. They don't have, like here in the United States, we have a lot of, Japanese American, associations or, different types of cultural groups. There's no real kind of central organizing body. And one of the difficulties, or one of the reasons why there isn't is because in Cuba, to form any kind of cultural or even nonprofit group, you have to apply through the government, and you have to get the government's blessing and approval to form that kind of organization. And so part of it is the government bureaucracy. Part of it also is just there's just this disconnect between for the Japanese Cubans, a disconnect between their Cuban roots and their Japanese roots, and the vast majority of Japanese Cubans don't have strong ties to their Japanese heritage. There's not a lot of, there's pretty much no Japanese restaurants, in Cuba. You can't get, a lot of the Japanese foodstuffs in Cuba either. They don't speak Japanese. They don't, wear the, Japanese clothes. They, don't have access to Japanese TV or comics or any of the other, fun things, even like Nintendo. Right? Those things are non-existent in Cuba. So it was just interesting to see, that basically the Japanese-Cuban community is highly assimilated into Cuban society, where they go to school with the other Cuban kids. They speak Spanish. They cook Cuban food at home. And as far as I know, they're Cuban first. I was asking a lot of questions for all the people I was interviewing. Is everyone from age 85, 90, all the way down to teenagers, and pretty much the consistent theme was they saw themselves first and foremost as Cubans, and then by coincidence they happened to be Japanese. So I thought that was a very interesting interesting takeaway. So we have a few minutes left, and I just want to show you some quick pictures here. So the first slide here, the woman in the middle, her name is Mirta, and she was my grandmother, my abuela, her best friend while in Cuba. And so Mirta here was my mom's babysitter for a number of years when my mom was growing up. And then, so Mirta in the middle, she's ethnically Japanese, but also born in Cuba. And then her husband on the left there, he's a native Cuban, and he's just a white guy. And there's a lot of cross-cultural and cross-ethnic marriages. Also, the Japanese Cubans didn't exclusively marry other Japanese Cubans. I mean, some of them did. But a lot of them, again, they tightly integrated into, Cuban society and, married local Cubans as well. The two women here are sisters, and these were two of my other, my abuela's best friends while in Cuba. And it was interesting, to meet, their children and their children's children, and just this. It was great to, be connected to my past, and I'm 30, and so for the past 30 years, I had heard stories, family stories about these people in Cuba, but I never really seen modern day pictures of who they are, or obviously met them, and it was just really great to connect to that part of my family's history. So here is a Japanese mausoleum in Havana. It's in the middle of a cemetery, and I mean, you have all these other graves and tombstones all in Spanish, but here in the middle of the central cemetery in Havana is this this mausoleum, and there are gosh, I think about 1,000 plus cremated remains here in the mausoleum. And so for me, this is where my great-grandfather's remains are. And so here is the the plot here. The Yoshimura one is where his remains are. And so that was just really impactful, just to be able to like go to right where my family where my family members' remains are, and and still are today. There had been talk in our family about trying to get his remains moved from Cuba and brought here to the United States, and there is a procedure for that through the U.S. interest section in Havana, but it's obviously this would be like uber low priority for the U.S. interest section and for the Cuban government to help with something like this, so we kind of let that one go. Anyway, that's the end of the formal presentation. I'm happy to answer any kinds of questions that people might have, if any. Sure, question to that.
I'm second generation Mexican American, so I'm just dying to know, how do you celebrate La Buena Noche?
So the question was, how does my family celebrate La Buena Noche? We don't.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it because you're not Christians, or?
No, so my family's Catholic. So we came. The majority of Cubans are Catholic. When my family came over in starting in 1963, Catholic Relief Services, I think that's the organization, that basically was the host organization for all these Cubans coming over. So in the United States, a lot of Cuban Americans are Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I'm not practicing, but my grandmother and her generation they go. It's really weird. They actually go to a Japanese Catholic church instead of Spanish-speaking one. It's kind of their way of kind of like staying in touch, yeah, with their roots. So, yeah. Yes.
I'm just curious. Right now, if you are from Japan and you want to go to Cuba, do they have a relationship when you get right there, or does like Americans ready to go to Canada first to get to Cuba? Like someone wanting to get there from Japan?
Yeah, so last I had, based on my 2006 research, yeah, if you are a Japanese citizen, you can easily go to Cuba directly.
Oh, okay.
The U.S. travel embargo is pretty much just focused on Americans. I mean, the U.S. government, tries to leverage, our laws to try and discourage other countries from, investing, in Cuba. And especially with some of the anti-terrorism laws, like it kind of like that's some additional leverage that our government is trying to use on other countries. But the reality is that the U.S. government hasn't actually penalized or punished companies in third countries for doing business in Cuba. So, yep.
So why don't we thank Chris for coming.